She stood at the pool gate holding her son's hand, $5 and hope in her pocket. But instead of welcome, they gave her humiliation. What they didn't know was who she really was becoming. In the blistering heat of July, when the pavement steamed and the cicadas cried loud enough to drown thoughts, the town swimming pool was the only place that offered even a moment's relief. It was a social center, a symbol of summer in Chesterville. Children laughed in the shallow end. Teenagers flaunted confidence near the diving boards. Mothers sipped iced drinks beneath wide umbrellas. But not everyone belonged. Naomi Langston had walked to the pool that day not for fun, but for her son. Her boy, Elijah Jr., barely 9 years old, had been asking for weeks to visit the pool like his classmates. They had passed the chain-link gate several times that summer, always with him pressing his face to the fence, eyes wide, imagining a life that seemed permanently on the other side. Naomi had told him someday, the same way she told him when he asked about pizza nights, school trips, or new sneakers. It was the way of survival, delaying dreams so they wouldn't sting so badly when denied. Naomi was a widow. Her husband, Elijah Sr., had passed from heart failure 3 years prior, collapsing on a job site while lifting a beam too heavy for his weakening body. His absence left behind not just grief, but unpaid bills, a shrinking fridge, and a rental house with a leaky roof that she couldn't afford to patch. She cleaned houses during the day and worked the front register at a gas station by night. Sleep came in patches. Joy came in small crumbs, like her son's laughter when she made up bedtime stories or managed to scrape together enough for ice cream on Fridays. But that day, she had $5 to her name, and it just happened to be the exact price for a child's swim wristband. So she washed Elijah Jr.'s only clean shirt, packed a peanut butter sandwich, and walked with him to the Chesterville public pool. He skipped ahead, humming a song from cartoons, eyes bright with anticipation. Naomi followed behind, worn sandals slapping against the hot concrete, clutching a plastic grocery bag with a towel inside. When they reached the counter, she smiled softly, pushing the crumpled bill across the glass. The attendant, a teenage girl with mirrored sunglasses and gum snapping between her teeth, barely looked at her before calling over a supervisor. Naomi felt the first drop of doubt then, like a cold fingertip running down her spine. The manager was a tall man with a clipboard and a polite expression that never reached his eyes. He looked Naomi over once, then her son, then the bag in her hand. He asked for ID, then proof of address, then suggested they must be confused. This pool was for registered residents only. Naomi explained that they were indeed residents, just not homeowners. He said rules were rules, and he didn't make them. Around them, people had begun to notice. A few parents stared. A lifeguard leaned closer to hear. Elijah Jr.'s humming had stopped. His hand reached for Naomi's without words. And then came the final blow. "Ma'am, we'll have to ask you to step aside. You're holding up the line." Naomi didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply nodded, took her son's hand, and walked away. Her face held the calmness of someone who had experienced too many small humiliations to flinch anymore. But inside her chest, something cracked, not from anger, but from a knowing. The knowing that some doors were never meant to open for people like her. They walked past the fence again, where her son didn't press his face this time. They passed the laughing kids, the splashing water, the sound of summer that belonged to someone else. When they reached home, she gave him the sandwich, kissed his forehead, and tucked him onto the couch with a fan blowing. Then she sat on the edge of the bathtub with the door closed and let the tears fall where no one could see. The next morning, Naomi didn't go to the houses she cleaned. She didn't go to the gas station either. Instead, she went to the library, an air-conditioned escape with free internet and quiet. she opened an old laptop she borrowed from a church fundraiser and began searching. Property auctions in Chesterville. She had no money, no degree, and no connections. But she had something else now, a fire. The pool had been her son's dream. Its rejection was now her mission. She learned slowly. For weeks, she read about foreclosure laws, community zoning, nonprofit ownership models. She watched YouTube videos about grants for community spaces and took notes on every local development plan. She asked questions at the town hall, posed as a student doing a project, and collected answers. No one knew what she was really planning. No one asked. When she found out the land adjacent to the pool was being auctioned, a narrow strip previously used for storage, she scraped together what she had. She sold her grandmother's ring. She borrowed from co-workers who trusted her. She signed up for a grant program aimed at women-owned community businesses. She wrote a plan. It was rough, but it was real. And when the auction day arrived, she sat in the back row of the courthouse with her son beside her, both dressed in second-hand clothes and holding hands like anchors. She didn't win the lot that day, but she introduced herself to the woman who did, an elderly real estate investor who admired Naomi's spirit and listened to her vision. That conversation would become the first door that opened for her. She didn't know it yet, but the same pool that once turned her away would one day bear her name. Naomi Langston didn't have the luxury of time or money, but she had something even more rare, determination that did not waver in the face of being overlooked. After the humiliation at the Chesterville public pool, she turned her quiet suffering into quiet planning. The fire that humiliation lit in her never flickered out. If they wouldn't let her son swim in their water, she would find a way to bring the water to him, and everyone else who had ever been told, "Not here." After meeting the elderly investor at the property auction, Naomi began visiting her weekly. Mrs. Eustace Grant was in her late 70s, a widow herself, with thinning silver hair tied in a bun and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She had built her small fortune buying and flipping small plots across the county. She didn't pity Naomi, but she respected her. That respect turned into mentorship. Naomi offered to clean her house in exchange for lessons, real estate basics, paperwork, city development processes. Eustace agreed. And so, each Friday afternoon, Naomi scrubbed tile and polished wood floors, then sat with a cup of tea as the older woman explained things that once seemed out of reach. Permits, zoning laws, construction costs, licensing. Through it all, Naomi continued working her 2 jobs, saving every possible dollar. She stopped buying anything non-essential. Her son, Elijah Jr., didn't complain when Friday pizza nights turned into peanut butter sandwiches. He saw the change in his mother's eyes, focused, unbreakable. Even at his young age, he understood. One day, while reviewing county land development plans, Naomi noticed something odd. The Chesterville public pool hadn't been updated in nearly 20 years. The property technically wasn't owned by the city but leased from a private group, an outdated clause that few had bothered to examine. Maintenance was minimal, and the lease was set to expire in less than a year. The city had not allocated funds to renew it yet. Naomi saw an opening. With the help of Eustace, she formed a legal nonprofit, Open Waters Community Foundation. Its stated purpose was simple: to provide equitable access to recreation for underserved families. The language was professional, but the motivation was deeply personal. Through outreach to local donors, small grant applications, and endless paperwork, Naomi raised her first $10,000. It wasn't nearly enough to buy anything grand, but it was enough to make noise. She hosted a free splash pad day on the abandoned lot next to the pool, using inflatable pools, hoses, and music. Over 100 families showed up. Kids played barefoot in water Naomi had fought to provide. Local news covered it. Parents clapped. Even city council members peeked in. She wasn't just a widow anymore. She was an organizer, a name that carried weight. And soon, city council meetings included her in budget discussions. When Naomi stood at the podium of the public forum to present her proposal for taking over the pool complex, the room was packed. She wore a navy dress, borrowed from Eustace, and spoke with a steady voice. Her words weren't emotional, they were exact. She referenced liability reports, youth activity surveys, and community health stats. But between every line was the truth, that the pool wasn't just a pool, it was a wall, and she was there to tear it down. Her proposal didn't pass that night, but it earned her a seat on the newly formed Community Recreation Task Force. And once inside the room, Naomi didn't waste time. She uncovered records of neglect, old inspection failures, complaints from staff about broken filters and overworked lifeguards. She discovered that private investors had quietly been circling the property, planning to turn it into high-rise condos. Naomi countered with a new proposal. Purchase the land herself under the nonprofit's name, refurbish it with sustainable funding, and make it permanently free for low-income families. By now, word of Naomi's mission had spread beyond Chesterville. Regional grants began coming in. A philanthropic wellness brand offered to sponsor her project after reading her story in a local op-ed. The fund crossed $100,000 in 5 months. Eustace, now fully invested in Naomi's vision, offered her biggest contribution yet. She transferred ownership of the storage lot adjacent to the pool to Naomi's nonprofit, completely free. Naomi used that land as leverage. She filed paperwork to link the 2 parcels under a single zoning improvement plan. That legal technicality forced the city to reevaluate all development proposals. In the final city meeting before the lease expiration of the Chesterville pool, Naomi stood again. This time, not with a proposal, but with a signed purchase agreement. She had outbid the private developers. She had raised enough to buy the entire complex outright. She had done what no one expected. She didn't just protest the gate. She now owned the entire fence. The vote was unanimous. The pool, once a symbol of exclusion, was hers. The following summer, Naomi renamed it the Elijah Langston Aquatic Center, in honor of her late husband and son. She added wheelchair ramps, hired teenage lifeguards from marginalized families, and made admission free for any child under 18. Swimmers of every shade and status entered freely. And on the first day of opening, as children flooded the newly resurfaced pool, Naomi stood near the entrance, not to check wristbands, but to hold them open. She had walked away humiliated. She returned triumphant. The summer sun blazed brighter than usual the day the Elijah Langston Aquatic Center officially opened to the public. It wasn't just a pool anymore. It was a declaration, a reshaping of space and story that everyone in Chesterville now felt in their bones. Where laughter once felt selective and conditional, it now flowed freely, unshaped by race, status, or income. The echo of water splashing and children laughing had never sounded so cleansing. Naomi stood near the center's new welcome arch as the ribbon was cut. Not by a politician, but by 3 children from different neighborhoods, each holding a part of the large ceremonial scissors. That moment was hers, but she didn't need the spotlight. She stood off to the side, dressed in a light summer dress, her feet in sandals, eyes misting as she watched Elijah Jr. cannonball into the deep end for the first time. The pool had changed, but so had Naomi. The woman who once scrubbed tile floors now met with architects and city planners. She attended development roundtables. She was asked to speak at universities on community resilience. People didn't just see her, they listened. Her story traveled far, shared in podcasts, community features, and eventually a feature in a national magazine under the headline, "The Widow Who Reclaimed the Water." But her transformation wasn't cosmetic. Naomi still lived in the same neighborhood, in the same modest house with a leaky roof she eventually managed to repair herself. She still shopped with coupons and volunteered at the same library where she'd once researched zoning laws in silence. The difference now was the way the world responded to her presence. There were those, of course, who struggled with her rise. Whispers floated at the local diner. Some said she got lucky, others murmured that she used sympathy to climb. But they couldn't ignore what she had built. They couldn't deny the walls she'd torn down, some made of wood and wire, others made of judgment and exclusion. In the weeks that followed the grand opening, Naomi began expanding her vision. She started community swim lessons for kids who had never learned. She created a mother's relaxation space at the edge of the pool for single moms, complete with shade, refreshments, and comfortable seats. Local volunteers offered free lessons on wellness, budgeting, and parenting. In a corner room she remodeled into a small resource hub. One afternoon, a woman approached Naomi near the lifeguard chairs. She wore oversized sunglasses and a wide hat, but Naomi recognized her voice instantly. It was the same pool manager who had turned her away that day, the one with the clipboard and the cold eyes. He didn't approach to argue. Instead, he handed her a folded piece of paper, his application to volunteer at the center. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't even mention the past. She simply took the form, thanked him, and placed it with the others. She had no room for revenge in a space she had built for restoration. Her strength wasn't loud, it was layered. The Elijah Langston Aquatic Center became a ripple effect across the region. Cities nearby called Naomi for advice on community-led development. Grants arrived unsolicited. A regional bank asked her to become an honorary ambassador for community trust building. She accepted, but always with the same principle. The work had to remain local, grounded, and real. Eustace Grant, her mentor, passed away peacefully that autumn. Naomi sat by her bedside in the hospital, holding her hand through her final breaths. In her will, Eustace left Naomi a small parcel of land near the town's public school, along with a letter. "You made them open the water. Now help them cross." With that land, Naomi began her next mission, building a community bridge program that would guide young students through trade skills, college preparation, and entrepreneurship. She named it Open Waters Academy, keeping the metaphor alive. Because for Naomi, water wasn't just about swimming. It was about access, movement, and the refusal to drown in other people's limitations. Though her face began appearing in the newspapers more often, Naomi still preferred quiet mornings. She would sit by the pool with her coffee before the gates opened, watching the water ripple with a kind of poetic calm. It was in those moments she remembered where she started, not with strategy or ambition, but with a single humiliation that changed everything. Her son, now 10, had grown into a confident, talkative boy who could swim laps faster than most teens. He once whispered to her after his first solo dive, "This feels like flying." And it was. What she had given him, and so many others, wasn't just a place to play, but the space to breathe without fear. One morning, a stranger visited. A young woman, no older than 20, wearing scrubs from a nearby clinic, approached Naomi. She introduced herself not as a guest, but as someone who had been sitting in the bleachers the day Naomi was turned away with her son. She remembered every second of it. She said it was that moment that pushed her to study community health, to return and give back. Naomi listened, nodding with quiet pride. That was the true return on her investment. The unseen lives changed because she refused to accept a closed gate. Naomi didn't need a statue, a mural, or a hall named after her. The real reward was the sound of water, free, inclusive, ever-moving. It reminded her daily that dignity couldn't be denied, it could only be delayed. And she had waited long enough. Years passed, but the water never stopped moving. The Elijah Langston Aquatic Center became more than a landmark in Chesterville. It became part of its heartbeat. Summers were now measured by the day the pool opened, not the school bell that ended the term. Families from outside the city made day trips just to feel what the space offered. Not just the cool of water on skin, but the warmth of being welcomed, truly and freely. Naomi Langston had built something that would outlive her. She had taken the sharp edges of rejection and reshaped them into soft curves of compassion, leadership, and opportunity. The pool that once told her no was now the place where countless others heard yes. And yet, Naomi never saw herself as a savior. She still lived modestly. She still did her own grocery shopping. She still answered phone calls from frustrated parents, personally guided lost volunteers, and pulled weeds from the poolside gardens every spring. She knew the work was sacred because it was continuous. Her son, Elijah Jr., was a teenager now, tall, kind-eyed, and with the confidence of someone who had grown up with an example of quiet power. He was on track to graduate early, already tutoring younger children at Open Waters Academy and lifeguarding on weekends. Naomi watched him swim laps with ease, and remembered that little boy pressing his face to the pool fence years ago. She had given him access to more than water. She had given him vision. As time wore on, Naomi's health began to fade. Not quickly, but enough that the ones closest to her noticed. The long hours, the stress, the sacrifice. Her body bore it all in silence. But she never complained. She simply moved a bit slower, spoke a bit softer, and made sure her succession plan was strong. She trained her board. She mentored new leaders. She handed off responsibilities in pieces, never all at once, so the transition would feel like continuity rather than replacement. When the town mayor offered to rename a street in her honor, Naomi declined. She asked instead that the funds be used to provide swim scholarships for rural kids. She had no desire to be idolized, only to be remembered by the ripples she made. The last summer of her life, Naomi spent nearly every morning sitting on a bench under the old magnolia tree near the deep end. People came and went, families waving, children laughing, staff checking in. But she sat mostly still, her eyes scanning the movement, the joy, the rhythm of everything she had helped build. It was enough. One morning in early August, Naomi didn't arrive for her usual seat. Staff assumed she was running late. But by noon, when calls went unanswered, her closest friend visited her house. There, Naomi was found in her chair by the window, journal in her lap, glasses still resting on her nose. Her passing had been peaceful, quiet, just like her strength. The news of her death spread like a storm that stopped everyone in their tracks. People who had never met her wept. Those who had grown under her leadership stood stunned, holding their chests as though they could still feel the echo of her footsteps through the hallways and poolside paths. The memorial service was held not in a church, but at the aquatic center she built. Hundreds attended. Some sat, some stood. Many wore shades of blue to honor the water she had claimed as her mission. Her son gave a quiet eulogy that did not focus on her achievements but on her laughter, how she had a laugh that made people believe in things again. The town declared August 14th, Naomi Langston Day. But more than a date, her legacy was embedded in the daily function of everything she left behind. Years passed. Open Waters Academy expanded into a multi-building campus that served 5 counties. The aquatic center remained free for children under 18. A mural was added, painted not on a wall, but on the floor of the shallow end, visible only when the water was calm. It showed Naomi's face looking upward, eyes wide, lips slightly curved, not smiling broadly, but softly, the way she always did when watching something beautiful grow. Tourists often came just to ask about the story. Newcomers would walk through the gates and see a plaque that hung beside the entrance. This place once denied her. She bought it not to own it, but to open it for everyone. But for those who had lived through it, who had seen her walk away from that gate in silence and return years later not with revenge, but restoration, the story didn't need a plaque. They told it to their children, they swam in it, they passed it on. And so, long after Naomi Langston was gone, the pool still carried her name, her mission, and her spirit. The gate that had once closed on her had never been locked again, because she didn't just buy the pool, she left it open forever.